Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper and analyze the articles relevant both for your prelims and the mains examination, along with the practice questions which can help you understand how to create answers and what kind of questions to be expected going ahead for the examination. So let us take a look at the topics that we are going to have a discussion for today. So in total, we are going to discuss around 9 topics for various different perspectives, both prelims as well as the mains. Now, today's newspaper is something which is dominated by the US elections. So obviously, almost all the articles are associated with the US elections and the outcome of the US elections and what the impact of those elections will have in the global order. So we are going to identify some of the articles, and we have identified some of the articles which are relevant in terms of understanding the future course of action that will impact not only the climate but global polity, and also when it comes to what will be the impact on India. So the first article that we will consider is a West Asia under Donald Trump. Now, that has appeared in the editorial section. This is relevant for your GS paper 2. Then what Trump 2.0 means for India. Now, this is something which has appeared in the also in the op-ed page, relevant for GS paper 2. Climate experts worry about Trump's re-election campaign and impact. This is relevant for your GS paper 3. And then a detailed analysis of why did Supreme Court uphold the UP Madrasa Act of 2004. So we have got some analysis which we had done yesterday also. This is a follow-up to it, and this is a detailed understanding of what was the issue, how it was raised in front of the Allahabad High Court, the observations of the Allahabad High Court, then why is it that the Supreme Court was approached, and the observations made by the Supreme Court. So that is something we are going to cover in detail. This is also relevant for your GS paper 2. Now, some of the articles relevant for the prelims is what we are going to cover. That is, unmanned vessel finishes 1500-kilometer voyage, and that is the Sagarmala Parikrama which has happened. Now, this is an ongoing initiative by the Navy where it supports the private sector also in order to come up with the innovative technologies. PM Vidyalakshmi scheme for higher education has received the cabinet nod. Union cabinet infuses fresh equity of close to around rupees 10,700 crores into FCI, and that is going to be beneficial for the agricultural and the farm sector. Now, India's palm oil imports have soared by more than 59% in the month of October owing to the festive season. But in the month of October, India has also witnessed a massive growth in terms of the automobile sector. What are the challenges? Why is it that the automobile sector has grown? What are the positives that we can ascribe out of it? So these are the topics that we are going to discuss in detail. But before we come into the topics, most of you who are interested for preparation of civil services, now many of the times there is a hesitation which occurs that is the required fees to be paid, is that too high, or what are the different types of incentives that we will get, let's suppose from which educators we are going to study, what are the quality of materials that you can avail for the preparation. Keeping that in mind, we have come up with the Unacademy Civil Services Championship Scholarship Test, and that is UCSC. It is going to be the largest scholarship test for civil services that will be held on 10th of November. So do attend this test, enroll for this test. The link and it is provided in the description below. And not only do you stand a chance to win very lucrative prizes, for example, a trip for the Border Gavaskar Trophy being held in Australia from this month onwards, or a staycation. Overall, you will have a chance to win prizes worth almost 50 crores. But other than that, there are certain other benefits also. For example, you will get to know that where do you stand in terms of the entire population who is preparing for the civil services. This is going to be a very representative idea about the large number of people who appear for the test, and you will get a representative rank as well. And that gives you an idea about how much you have to prepare, but also you unlock the potential to attend live sessions from the leading educators of the country, and also live lecture PPTs, etc., doubt resolution. So your preparation overall shall be enhanced along the way. Now, do enroll and do attend the test. Now, after this, let's move ahead with the first article of the day, and that is a West Asia under Donald Trump. Now, the reality of the fact is that Donald Trump has been re-elected, and has been re-elected with a clear majority. Now, this was something which was slightly expected beforehand, but then the aspects of re-election was put under doubt owing to the comeback that Kamala Harris had made in the recent weeks of a campaign trail. But the re-election of Donald Trump brings to attention various different aspects and interests across the global order, be it the international relations, be it the global conflicts, be it the interest of countries like India, China, Pakistan, and even on matters such as climate. What US decides to take an action for is going to decide what the future course will be for many of the global agendas. Now, amongst the global agenda, one of the key points, sticking points today in the world is the conflict in West Asia. Now, that conflict in West Asia, where you have Israel basically carrying out and spreading out the attacks now. Earlier, it was restricted to the region of Gaza. Now, after that, it spread over and spilled over to Lebanon. And then now it has spilled over to Iran. So the West Asian crisis is unfolding in front of our very own eyes, and it is increasingly becoming very volatile day by day. So Donald Trump inherits a very critical scenario, and his actions will always end up determining, in this particular case, that how this entire conflict will turn going ahead. So before understanding the entire predicament and the future expectations from Donald Trump and the Trump administration, first of all, the West Asia crisis and the Biden administration, what is it that Trump is inheriting? So the West Asia crisis, which started more than a year ago. Now, most of you would be aware about the nuances about it. We have discussed it multiple times, that why it has spilled over. So this West Asia crisis has started to spill over, right? And when we say started to spill over, means what? Earlier, you had Israel, which was carrying out offensive actions in Gaza, then where till now, as per estimates, more than 43,000 Palestinians have lost their lives. So that is as serious a kind of an impact or destruction that you can think about it. Then this spilled over to Lebanon over a month back, and now it has spilled over to Iran. Now, what was the approach of the US administration under Joe Biden is something that the world had been raising questions about. You see, Biden administration had provided a tacit support to Israel, and any of the actions taken by Israel was mostly advocated by the Biden administration as a right to retaliation. So there was a tacit US support for which Biden received a lot of criticism, and US has received a lot of criticism. As per estimates by Brown University, that indicates that till now, since the onset of the war and the conflict in West Asia, US has provided arms and ammunition and support worth $17 billion. $17 billion to Israel. Right? So there is that support of arms, the global arms industry, right? And the military industrial complex in US that is providing overall support of You can think about it, how huge that sum is going to be. Almost roughly 1/5 of our entire defense budget for a year. That is something that US has provided only to Israel in that past year. But then US approach to Israel was much more nuanced at that point of time as well. For example, while US was supporting Israel's right to retaliation, US at the same time did not want, our Biden administration did not want this particular conflict to move out of control or sphere out of control. So that is where what its actions would be was not only to turn a blind eye in case of the Palestinian deaths, but at the same time also ensure that there is the existing goodwill for US in the Mid-Eastern countries. Now, this came with a lot of backlash. Various different countries lost hope for the US mediation and also the fact that US can actually make something happen. And this is where the Biden administration was seen to be very ineffective. Even the Abraham Accords, which basically were pioneered by US to bring about a lasting peace in Mideast and West Asia, that Abraham Accords in itself was seen to be dicey and very, very dicey. So here, the Biden administration's approach was to ensure West Asian alliance or nations neutrality towards US. Which means what? Which basically means that they did not want to make newer enemies out of West Asia. That's it. So it was a very reserved approach. Now, the outcome of this has been what? There have been unending protests going around in the US and across the world with regards to what has happened. Israel has been acting like a kind of a country which has gone berserk and which has simply gone out of order, wants to do anything out of its whims and fantasies, and that is where the impact is going to spiral out of control in very near future. So that is a scenario that Donald Trump inherits. Now, when we say Trump has come back and has been re-elected, his course of action, obviously one can expect, is going to be a carry forward mechanism of what Trump 1.0 indicated to us. Yes, there can be a kind of a school of thought that Trump 2.0 will be much more wiser, Trump 2.0 will be much more rational, but after all, it is Donald Trump that we are talking about. So there is going to be a continuity of the policy measures that the previous administration of Donald Trump had indicated. So here, what is it that Donald Trump's 1.0 or the first administration has indicated or has done that sets an expectation of what to observe and what can come in the near future? So first of all, Donald Trump was the individual who moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. US support was very key for doing that. And please understand that Donald Trump has been, and the Trump administration has been, a long-term, very vocal support of Israel and Israel's action in the region. In fact, just prior to the Israel's war or Israel's offensive action in Iran, while Joe Biden had maintained the stance that Iranian nukes should not be touched, etc., the Trump campaign had gone ahead publicly to issue the statement that if I were in power, the first thing I would do is destroy the Iranian nukes, and Israel would be doing that. So Trump has always been a very tacit supporter of Israel and Israelis' cause of action. Then Trump, the US, also supported under Trump Israel's annexation of Golan Heights in Syria and recognized the Israel's annexation. So again, tacit US support and an overt US support was where the world could not even react. Then withdrawal of US from the Iranian nuclear deal. Now, in case you are not aware, then prior to Donald Trump, the US presidency was held by Barack Obama. Now, Barack Obama had been a very key influencer in terms of bringing Iran to the peace table, negotiating a nuclear deal so as to ensure that Iran does not develop nuclear weapons. At the same time, Barack Obama had also been an active participant in ensuring that the world agrees for climate change action and influenced the signing of the Paris Agreement. So as soon as Donald Trump came to power, Trump withdrew American support from these two things. First was the Iranian nuclear deal, and second was the climate agreement or the Paris Agreement. Climate agreement we will talk about separately in the third topic. But when Donald Trump withdrew the US support or the US inclusion in the Iranian nuclear deal, Iran saw it as a blatant betrayal, where the global world or the global nations, they had talked and told Iran that you'd follow this course of action, no sanctions will be imposed against you. As soon as Trump came, US withdrew from the deal, sanctions were imposed on Iran. So what did Iran do? Iran started developing the nuclear weapons again, putting the peace and the situation and the calmness in West Asia in peril once again. So a kind of a rogue action by Iran is also something that can be blamed or ascribed to Trump administration's first action or the first term. So there is that support. Then Abraham Accords also were seen as, while Abraham Accords, US said that it will bring a lasting peace in the region of West Asia and Middle East. But then the Iranian people and the Iranian government and administration saw it as US's effort to mobilize the sentiments in region of West Asia against Iran. So you can think about it that there is an existent animosity or hostility that not only the Trump administration has indicated to some sections in Palestine and Iran, but also there's a reverse hostility shown by some countries towards US owing to Trump's action. In fact, Trump had and the Trump administration had also come up with a Palestine peace deal. Immediately, it was something which was trashed by the Palestinian authorities, seeing it to be absolutely pro-Israel. So that is something that Trump comes up with a background. So what can be the expectations going ahead in terms of West Asian crisis? Now you have to understand that Trump comes with his own baggage of electoral expectations. Large number of people have voted for Donald Trump. Now it is true that while few of the Americans, they vote in terms of the foreign policy actions that US is going to take, but you have to understand that majority of the voters, they are not concerned with what US does or what happens in West Asia or Middle East. All they are concerned about is what happens in the region of US. So here, two things. First of all, you have to understand that the approach of Trump campaign and Trump administration, first is not America's war. Which means what? Which basically means that American war or American influence in terms of the global conflict is something that the citizenry of US is not ascribable to. They don't believe in that. In fact, J.D. Vance, the new vice president and his running mate. Now, J.D. Vance had made that public statement in many of the campaign speeches that the US incursion into Iraq earlier, that is under George W. Bush, now that was very meaningless and that had a lot of disastrous consequences, and US should not have done that. And even Donald Trump in his previous administration had basically said that US interventions in be it Afghanistan or anywhere else is absolutely not needed. This is not US's war. So US starts to look inwards under Trump administration. That is something which is expected. So that means US will have a very outsider approach in terms of what West Asian crisis is unfolding. But then the second parameter or the second pillar of his campaign when it came to West Asia is also very important. And that is, his campaign also worked upon the cost of living. Which means what? That the inflation, the rate of inflation, etc., that should be very, very low. Right? That is what people in US, they are mostly having a problem with the inflation rate. Right? So, when the crisis in West Asia unravels, as the Israel and Iranian crisis is being very, very volatile, what will happen immediately is that the Persian Gulf gets entangled into conflict. When the Persian Gulf gets entangled into the conflict zone, then all the oil transport which happens from the region of the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz, via the Gulf of Oman, Arabian Sea, and the rest of the world, now that region of Persian Gulf becomes a stagnant region, means trade gets impacted. Once the trade of oil and other commodities get impacted, there is an inflationary trend which the world experiences. And with that inflationary trend, what happens? There is going to be a rise in prices across the world. US will also experience and feel the pinch. This is where the core supporters or the electorate of Donald Trump, they don't want the prices to rise. So there is all the incentive which is present for Donald Trump to ensure that the crisis is curtailed as early and as soon as possible without it impacting inflation at all. So this will initiate a kind of early end to the crisis. Now, what else to expect? Now, Donald Trump, owing to his antagonistic and hostile approach to Iran, it is a given fact that you will expect more military deployments in terms of not soldiers on the ground, not foot on the ground, but in terms of US military assets. Those will be deployed in terms of the aircraft carrier groups, the carrier battle groups as they are referred to as, then along with the heavy bombers which have already been deployed in the Middle East, they are going to be more proactive and Iran-centric approach. So even if a peace deal tomorrow is going to be arrived at, you can expect that it is going to be heavily Israel tilted, and at one end, Israel will be given a much greater free hand in terms of dealing with the problems that it thinks that it faces in the region of West Asia and Middle East. So that is why not only is the crisis going to be much more volatile and much more unexpected in the coming months or the coming weeks, at the same time, you can expect countries like Iran to have a retaliatory approach, because now Iran will be on tenterhooks because it sees US as the adversary in this war. So what is it that we have seen? What is the condition that Donald Trump inherits? What is it that Trump's previous administration has indicated to us? And what is it that we can expect going ahead into the future? Now, generally in questions for the mains examination, you won't get a question that Trump administration did what or Biden administration did what. No. But you can have a kind of a tangential question associated. Let us take a look at it. Discuss the impact of global electoral compulsions on the conflict-ridden West Asia. Okay, so it is a kind of a generic but specific question. Generic in terms of global electoral compulsions. And how do you write the answer for that? So basically in the intro, what do you write? What needs to be written in the intro here? In the intro, do you straight away start with the electoral compulsions? No. You start with the conflict-ridden West Asia. That is what you have to mention. That West Asia is a very volatile region when it comes to achievement of peace and when it comes to the actions taken by individual parties. That is where you experience conflicts like Iran, Israel, Iran, Lebanon, Iran, Israel, Iran, then Israel, Lebanon, then Saudi Arabia, Iran. So it is a conflict-ridden zone. That is what you have to specify. Conflict-ridden zone in the intro. Then in the body, what do you write? So in the body, you talk about the fact that the unfolding of any global crisis in the present day and time is very much determined by the global compulsions and the global actions and the sentiment which develops not only amongst the people but also amongst the policymakers and the decision makers. There have been evidences of various different leaders having a certain opinion, or the population at large having a certain opinion, and the nations expressing support or opposition to actions in Middle East and West Asia. That is your precursor for the body, okay, that you have to write. So initially about the compulsions, electoral pressure. Then you come into the specifics of it, right? That is the US administration. So here you talk about that how you had a kind of a Biden administration providing a tacit support, but at the same time trying to ensure that there is a larger peace level maintained in West Asia. But at the same time, secondly, you also have to talk about the fact that the Trump administration is seen to be much more polarizing and eventually providing a much greater free hand military support, because understand, Trump administration will always end up advocating for further growth of the military industrial complex in US. So for them, military supply and equipment supply to Israel is needed. So that is something that you can talk about. So what do you write in the conclusion for these answers? When you write the conclusion, you talk about the way forward, a positive outcome. That is why the need of the hour is to ensure that there is enough awareness level raised amongst the global population about the realities of the conflict and also what should be the possible outcome, rather than the population leading to have a post-truth world or a kind of a conflagrated truth to be believed in. So that is what you write. Eventually, with this awareness, we can think about achieving a global peaceful order, which is the requirement, urgent requirement of the time. Okay, that is how you conclude the answer, right? Now, after this, we then come to the second article. Popular vote, Ilma, is in terms of the number of votes, absolute number of votes that are cast. So US electoral process is something that has been covered in the UCAN session also, so you can take a look at that. So you have the electoral college and then you have the popular votes. Both of them are different. For example, let's suppose you consider the states. So when you talk about the states like Virginia, states like California, now California has got 55 electoral votes. Wyoming has got 3 of them, owing to the fact that the number of or the population is very less in Wyoming as compared to California having a population of many millions, or around 60 million. So based upon that, you have the electoral college which is formed. Then you have people casting the ballot. So the number of votes that are actually cast, that is referred to as the popular vote. So getting the popular vote means getting the absolute majority. In case of the previous Trump administration, you had the situation where Trump did not get the popular vote. In terms of the absolute share of voting percentage, Trump got somewhere around 46% of the popular vote. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, scored much more or got much more popular vote. But in terms of electoral college votes, that is where Hillary Clinton and the Democrats got lesser amount of votes. So that is the complexity of the proportional representation and the preferential voting system that the US indicates. Okay. Now, after that, the second article, what Trump 2.0 means for India. Now, here, Sandhyalata, I want to know, is Trump's success in election can affect India in positive way or negative way? That is what we are coming to. That is the second article. Okay. So what Trump 2.0 means for India. So as Donald Trump is elected and re-elected again, the world watches in bated breath regarding what it will mean for countries like India and various different countries across the globe. So here, first of all, let us crisply analyze what is the impact that it will have on India. You have to keep in mind that even yesterday, you had the Prime Minister talking with the President-elect Donald Trump, and positives were said about India, that India is popular, India is a great country, etc. Prior to the electoral or the election also, almost just a few days back, Donald Trump had also issued a public statement about the atrocities which are happening in Bangladesh against the Hindus. So that is where the impact on India is not going to be very straightforward. Some positives, some negatives. Keep in mind that during the entire campaign season, Donald Trump has charged India with the allegation of being one of the significant countries which are violating the tariff norms and which is charging a lot of tariff, right? So that is where India also has to be concerned about. So let us first of all talk about the aspect of the positives that India can expect. Then we will take a look at the challenges. First of all, what can be the positives for India? The first positive for India is going to be the deepening of the military ties. Even under the previous Trump administration, the military ties started deepening, right? So military ties are going to benefit. Military ties are going to benefit. And this will mean the industry to industry relationship, right? Rather than simply being an import dependent country, India can expect a kind of technological interventions and technological help as well. And this is very vital, because if you take a look at India's defense parameter right now, think about it. We are facing some problems associated with acquisition of the G414 engines, which will be integrated with the Tejas Mark II aircraft that would require the G414. And that is where we are facing some of the issues, despite the fact that there has been an agreement for greater collaboration. Then there are certain issues with regards to even the Reaper drones. Now, again, we have signed an agreement, but with regards to the production, etc., there is a kind of a hesitation there as well. So all these nuances, they are expected to be ironed out. Then, when it comes to our neighborhood, that is where we can have a kind of a breather. Because you see, when even the Galwan crisis unfolded, at that point of time, it is now well known in strategic circles and defense circles that the US under Trump not only provided India with vital intel services, but also provided India with a lot of various different supports, like the cold weather clothings which are required, satellite images, and some of the defense equipments also on a fast track manner. So these are where India-China and Indo-Sino conflict, that is something where India will benefit. So the China conflict, because Trump sees China as its greatest adversary. Then when it comes to our neighboring nation of Pakistan, Trump's approach in the previous administration had been the most drastic in terms of the previous US presidents. While the previous US presidents had talked about curtailing Pakistan's ability to provide support to terrorism and tacit support to terrorism, Trump went ahead and issued the directive to cut down all the various different aids, military help, etc. that Pakistan is getting. So that is where even in our own neighborhood, be it Pakistan, be it even Bangladesh, even in the case of Bangladesh, now Biden administration had taken a very different approach when it came to Pakistan, Bangladesh, even Maldives for that matter. Right, Biden administration saw the upheaval in Bangladesh. In fact, the Sheikh Hasina administration had been alleging this for a long time, that Biden administration is involved in the kind of upheaval and uprooting of the Bangladeshi government. But then, having said that, when it comes to Bangladesh, the internal affairs of Bangladesh, India does not have much of the say in that and should not have much of a say in the internal affairs of Bangladesh. But when it comes to its activities and actions against India, that is where India can expect a peaceful situation provided that the US will now take a look at it in a much more objective manner. That is, in a black and white situation, that whether there is a support to arms groups or not. So that is where neighborhood will be benefited. Then, when it comes to various different pressures that India had been experiencing in terms of the right to freedom of religion, then right of minorities, amnesties, and various different actions against the NGOs, US administration had been expressing a lot of pressure and exerting a lot of pressure, and owing to these facts, India was oftentimes put on a kind of an isolated condition, and that is something where the pressures on India owing to these factors are going to ease off, right? Then when even it comes to the most conflagrating issues in the present times, that is the issue with the Khalistani movement and also people like Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. Now there, it is expected, and his campaign committee has expressed a great hope, that Trump will crack down very hard on the Khalistani issue, because the Democrats under the Biden administration, they were seen to be providing a kind of a free hand to the separatist ideologues with the thinking that it is a kind of expression of free speech. Donald Trump is not expected to provide any kind of laxity or flexibility in this manner. And that is where that individual's own ability to take a look at things either white or black, that is expected to yield some positives in this case. So that is where you have Khalistan issues, right? That is where India can expect some US actions. Then even when it comes to the NGOs, pressure groups, that is where India can benefit. And also, in terms of the fossil fuel utility and the pressure on India to turn to renewables, etc., that is going to reduce. The pressure for climate action is going to reduce, because Trump himself does not believe in the entire principle of climate change. Trump, during his campaign, repeated this many times, that we have a lot of oil, so it will be foolish on the side of the US to curb the usage of fossil fuel. We have to use more fossil fuel. So obviously, there were various different deals which happened during the time of the previous Trump administration, where Petronet from India was supposed to invest close to around $2.5 billion in the US for the exploration of and extraction of oil. Now, with the oncoming of the Biden administration, all these deals went into abeyance. So that is where again the fossil fuel supply, and that would mean the diversity of energy supply for India. As many different sources as you have for the import of energy, better and more resilient your system gets. So this is where India can benefit, as another US can serve as another source of energy supply. Now you see, this is where Biden administration was seen to be slightly indecisive. Not only did it not take any stringent action against US's own use of fossil fuel, but at the same time, and why did it not take any severe action? Because of the lobbying by the industries. But at the same time, it did not want other countries to use fossil fuel. So it was more of a hypocritical stance. At max, you can term Trump's stance as being ignorant, that he does not know. He is absolutely oblivious to the fact that what climate change will be, what fossil fuels can do, is absolutely oblivious to the fact. So he does not care if US uses it, simply, and also he does not care if India uses it. So there is a kind of a uniform abeyance or a uniform oblivion which the US administration can be expected to follow up. Then there is also an expectation of increase in the trading activities on certain levels. So these are the positive expected. But at the same time, there are a lot of challenges. What are the challenges and the concerns? That is important to be understood. Now you see, when we talk about the case of US and India. Now, US is amongst India's largest trading partner. India and US have had a trade of close to around $118 to $120 billion annually. US also terms India as amongst its top 10 trading partners. But uniquely, India is the only one where US has got a trade deficit, and Trump does not like it at all. So that is where Trump has openly criticized India for having a predatory tariff policy. And even in his previous administration, there was a public statement which was made against the tariff or the rates charged against the import of Harley-Davidson bikes in India. India also threatened to retaliate with a kind of tariff to be imposed on almonds, etc. India did not do so, but that was a very ugly spat in terms of the trade requirements. So that is where it will be impacted. Secondly, even when we talk about solar panels, renewables, now there also India does export a lot of panels to the US, right? There also US does not want India to impose any extra tariff or wants it to be available at cheaper rates. So that is where Indian trade will be impacted. So tariffs and retaliation, or simply trade impact due to tariffs and counter tariffs which are imposed. Secondly, when we talk about trade, obviously the long-term policy direction regarding trade will have a significant impact. But at the same time, when it comes to Trump's own way of action, it is oftentimes seen to be very shallow, in the sense that oftentimes the Trump administration or his meeting with the other leaders, for example, the Prime Minister, etc., that is something that he makes it public, and he tells that on the public forum. Now, the meeting between the leaders, the conversation between the leaders is something which should not be leaked, which should never be leaked. It is done in good spirits. So that is where the very aspect of mediation, the very nuance of statesman or statescraft, that is something which is under risk. Now, this is where Trump has also previously used various public platforms to mock India's policy with regards to trade, even mock the Prime Minister's statements with regards to trade activities, etc. So that is where diplomacy and statescraft, that will take a backseat. That is something you can expect. Statecraft. Okay. Then, when we talk about the other concerns, not only about trade, but even in terms of what India's future course of action is going to be in the neighborhood, US sees itself as a kind of a mediator. For example, in the previous administration, US publicly issued the statement while Imran Khan was visiting US. Trump made the statement that I can be a mediator for the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, right? So US unnecessarily meddling into our own disputes, that is not something which is going to be looked kindly upon by the policy makers, and that is meddling into disputes. Okay, unnecessarily into disputes. So this is again another point of concern. Then a most major point of concern is what? That Trump is always seen as anti-migrants, right? Immigration is something which is a significant amount of danger that US is facing. So Trump is expected amongst the first activities or actions that he takes, he is expected to bring about a very tighter control of H-1B visa norms. And that will impact the trade in services that India has. The moving of the software professionals to US, that is going to be impacted. providing them with a kind of the green card, etc., already on a back burner, that is further going to be impacted there. So that is where H-1B visa, right? This will impact the services export of India. Export. Right? So these are some of the concerns that India faces. But then yes, there is also the benefits that you have to keep in mind, and these are the benefits which are associated. These are the concerns associated. It is only going to be the time which is going to tell us what the future course will be. But needless to say, India would be, and across the world also, all the global leaders in administration would be very, very, very and on their toes with regards to what US can do and what US will do. Statecraft basically means the negotiation which happens between the leaders, right? Now, that is where Trump does not take it seriously. Trump basically mumbles it up in media briefings, in various different campaign speeches. Trump will mimic the, let's suppose, Prime Minister and Indian administration and Indian officials. Now, that is something which is not in good faith. If a leader is saying something to another global leader, that is said in confidence. And that is not something that you blabber across the world stage. So that is one of the lacunae, major lacunae which is there. Then Shazia Parveen, sir, it means we can say that India has more advantage or benefit during the administration of Donald Trump than Biden or any other administration. See, India can benefit because in many of the cases, Biden administration had either taken an approach of disdain, that no, this is a country with a flawed democracy, this is a country where the freedom is not ensured, etc. Now, that is where oftentimes it was restricted to certain levels. But in many of the cases, Biden administration has been good to India. But in case of Trump, that support is going to be much more overt. Yes, India is going to experience certain amount of concerns and setbacks. For example, while we say that the NGOs, many of the NGOs in India, there have been actions taken under the FCRA Act, right? Now, where the money is coming from. So there, Biden administration was particularly stringent against India. Trump can be expected to have a no-holds-barred policy. I don't care. But when it comes to the NGOs associated with Christian missionaries, that forms his core voting bloc. That is where, while Biden administration did not take a vociferous approach, Trump administration is expected to be much more aggressive in terms of only those select NGOs. So it is going to be a mixed bag out there. US seeing India as counter country against China, which intimidate China to retaliate. No. China is much smarter than that. What about supporting Ukraine and Israel? Does he move away? No, Ukraine can expect a very difficult time ahead, owing to the fact that Trump will ensure that the war comes to an end as per his promise. And obviously, Russia is not going to budge. So there is going to be a peace deal on the table, which is expected very soon, with some very hard bargain on the side of the Ukrainians. Way forward can be, it doesn't matter, either Biden or Trump, it should be our own diplomatic and interest, national interest, which should be managed and aligned. Absolutely, yes. That is the case of all the various different countries. They will be taking a look at their own national interest. Now, one of the final articles associated with the Trump re-election that we are going to talk about today. There are multiple different articles about why Trump got elected, re-elected, etc. But that is not for the concern of UPSC. It is having an entertainment quotient value. What is relevant for civil services here? First of all, climate experts worry about Trump's re-election impact. So, when we talk about climate actions, I have already told you about the fact that Trump believes that climate change is a hoax. Climate change is not a reality. And Trump has went ahead and issued a statement about the fact that, for example, Paris deal and the Paris Agreement, that it is a bad deal that committed the country to pay billions of dollars without getting anything in return and ensuring a shutdown of the fossil fuel industry. That is how he sees the Paris Agreement. Now you see, climate change is upon us. India is one of those countries which is experiencing the vagaries of climate change and the impact of climate change being amplified in the recent past. So that is a reality that the world is facing, the problem that the world is facing. So Barack Obama, predecessor of Donald Trump, was a very key instrumental figure in ensuring that the world comes to the same page when it comes to the Paris Agreement. And the world comes to an ideation about what needs to be done going ahead into the future. Under the Paris Agreement, the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, CBDR, common but differentiated responsibility, that is something which was paid attention to. Now, what is this CBDR? That means the developed economies of the world, like the US, the European nations, etc., who have benefited earlier by exploiting the environment, who have polluted much more in the previous century. After all, that is what is leading to the climate change presently. Now, those countries have to take greater responsibility, pay financial assistance to the underdeveloped and developing nations in order to transition to cleaner energy, better technology, better finances, and ensure an emission-free future. So that is something that the principle of CBDR was very instrumental in the Paris Agreement. Now, Paris Agreement is considered to be a significant requirement in the world being able to limit the level of warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius by 2100. Now, as soon as Donald Trump came to office previously, the first action that he took was withdraw US's support for the Paris Agreement and involvement in the Paris Agreement. Now, immediately what that did, now understand, under the Paris Agreement, or even before that, under the Kyoto Protocol, what was the norm? And what was the understood principle? As per CBDR, developed countries have to provide funds, right? They have to provide funds to the developing countries. Now, under the Paris Agreement, that fund was decided to be roughly 100 billion per year. Now, obviously, many developed countries did not like this, right? Many of the developed countries were absolutely antagonistic to it, that why should we provide money? But they agreed in terms of the global consensus. As soon as US withdrew, other developed countries also found a way, an excuse. They said, we will also not pay. And that is where there was a withdrawal. And Biden administration, when it came to power, immediately it joined the Paris deal. It talked about climate change much more. With the return of Donald Trump, that again goes into abeyance. And what does that mean for climate action? Now, you see, this month you are going to have Conference of Parties number 29 to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Baku, Azerbaijan, right? Now, we have talked about it earlier as well, that this Conference of Parties is already mired in a lot of controversy with regards to whether any country is going to take any action or not, because all the developed countries, many of them, were putting their hopes on the table that if US election decides to put Donald Trump back in power, means nobody has to pay any money because US is not going to put money. Being the developed country of the world, being the largest economy of the world, that is one of the obligations that US has to play. So that is where US is found to be wanting. Now, one of the agenda of the Conference of Party 29 was to set up a new collective quantified goal, right? Or a kind of a simple new financial target. New collective quantified goal. Quantified goal. This is basically to provide finances to underdeveloped countries and developing countries. Now, this was, as we mentioned, to the tune of close to around $100 billion per year. Now, this is not going to happen. US participation is also in doubt. It is seen to be one of the cases where US might participate, but it will be for the withdrawal from these climate actions. India can expect a kind of much more harsher stance at these conference of parties. Already you have to understand, US was already hesitant in providing money. For example, just to give you an idea about how hesitant US has been, even Biden administration, which is seen to be a very pro-nature, pro-climatic condition, just to give you and put facts on the table. Now you see these conference of parties which are conducted, for example in Baku, etc., there is money which is required. Some amount of money is required. The delegations will travel, the ministers will travel, their stay, their accommodation has to be arranged. So where do you get that money? So that money is there for UNFCCC. UNFCCC has got some money. Who provides the money to UNFCCC? Countries, developed countries like US. Now Biden administration had not provided money to UNFCCC, due to which UN could not conduct the ministerial meet for Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was not a large amount that US was not providing. It was only around $72 million for a $30 trillion economy. $72 million is hardly anything. But that was for climate change action, to ensure that the secretariat functions. US did not provide that. So Biden administration did end up indicating these kind of hypocritical moments. And as I told you earlier, Trump, to the worst of it you can think, is simply oblivious. Ignorance is bliss. So that is where you can expect the withdrawal of US from these climate actions, which will further endanger the many different areas of the globe in the near time future. Because amongst the largest emitters, amongst the most historical emitters, US needs to curb not only its own emissions, but also ensure that there is cleaner technology and cleaner energy being produced across the world. Okay? Now, I hope this is something which is clear. Now, question Naveen Kumar. What is the H-1B visa issue? See, H-1B visa is the visa issued for the skilled professionals. So, for example, when you talk about the software engineers here in our country, now many of them, they travel to the US, they move to the US owing to the role and owing to the requirement of the clients. Now, for that, many of them, they are given the H-1B visa. So that visa basically means you get a permit to work there for some duration, and then you can apply for the green cards, etc., which can eventually pave way for citizenship. Now that is being seen as the Trump administration as one of the ways in which number of immigrants into US is flooding and increasing more. Trump does not want to have that. If you recall one of the very infamous speeches of Donald Trump's election campaign, he said that migrants are known to be eating cats and dogs. You can hardly think of any more statement which can be more ignorant. So that is where that kind of a policy stance, which means that immediately you have a curb on the number of visa issues. So the number of people from India moving for professional purposes to US, that will come to a stop. And why do people move from India to US for professional purposes? That is a kind of a service that we are providing. It is our services export, right? So this is also something which is vital for our own remittances which come back to the country. So the remittances, that will come to a kind of, that will expect a kind of a jolt, but also the services export will be impacted, influencing our overall trade deficit. Okay? Right. This shows the hypocrisy that US can provide 17 billions. Yes, that is true. Not claiming, despite he won the election. What can we expect in Bangladesh since Sheikh Hasina hasn't resigned? No, in Bangladesh, it is US cannot take a direct action in the case of Bangladesh, but you can expect a kind of different approach as compared to the Biden administration, where he's already going to be, that is where Mohammed Yunus has made a very, very careful, stanced approach and statement, urging US and expressing hope that there will be cooperation with US on common ground. So Bangladesh also is very wary of what Trump campaign and the Trump administration will hold for it. In that matter, in the entire neighborhood, if you consider, India is best placed in terms of what it can expect out of the Trump administration. Pakistan, China, Bangladesh under the present administration, and even Maldives, because Maldives' proximity to China is something that US administration will look at it very suspiciously. Right. Now, coming to the practice question. For climate actions to be sustainable, it is important for countries like US to agree on climate actions. Elaborate. Now, here, how do you introduce this? When we talk about climate action, so climate change, in the introduction, you talk about the climate change aspect of climate change. That climate change is a reality which is impacting the global order in terms of countries like India experiencing loss in terms of billions of dollars and very vital lives every year due to climate change. That will be your intro. Brief, keep it brief. Immediately switch into the body where you talk about that this climate change requires an urgent call for action by various different countries where they need to take some curative measures to ensure that the temperature is limited and many of the global climate tipping points, they are not breached, ensuring that the global biodiversity and the ecosystem services are maintained in the near future. That is what you mention. Then after that, you talk about the fact that the climate actions are mainly determined by the global conventions like UNFCCC and actions like the Paris Agreement. But then after that, there are certain challenges. What are the challenges? So then you talk about the US flip-flopping in terms of the climate actions, right? And there you talk about the lack of proper initiative for financing by countries and technological leaders like US also provides an example for other hesitant developed countries to provide funding. And that is something which is very apparent, which has been apparent in terms of devising of, for example, loss and damage fund, the adaptation fund, global financial assistance, all of that have been under abeyance. So a US withdrawal from these actions would basically pave the way for a kind of an anarchist availability of global opinion where you have various different interest forces that you talk about. In conclusion, you simply reiterate this, that it is the need of the hour to ensure we come on a common platform for our fight against climate change, right? That is something that you end the answer with. Okay. Now, another article. Now, this is the article which appears Is the audio available? I hope now everything is sorted and is available. So this is about the act which was earlier challenged in the Allahabad High Court, and now Supreme Court has quashed that particular order by the Allahabad High Court. So what was that about? First of all, let us understand very crisply what is the background of it. Now you see, when you talk about madrasa, now madrasa is an Arabic term which denotes an educational institution. Now this has been prevalent in our country for centuries now. This was something which was actively supported during the times of the Delhi Sultanate and even during the time of the Khiljis. That is, it received active state support. You have many of the luminaries and social reformers that you can think about. For example, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who is said to have received the primary set of information and education from madrasa. You can also count in Prem Chand, Rajendra Prasad. Now, many of the eminent personalities of India, they have been the product of these madrasas as well. But you see, there has always been a kind of an issue in terms of the quality of education being imparted in these madrasas. Now, whether it is only restricted to the religious teachings or whether it is also associated with providing quality education, that has been the bone of contention for some time. Now, the support provided to the madrasas in terms of the financial support, that mostly is coming from the state governments across the country. Now, what is the background? Now, Uttar Pradesh Board of Madrasa Education Act 2004 had defined madrasa education as including education in Arabic, Urdu, Persian, Islamic studies, philosophy and other branches as may be specified by the Uttar Pradesh Board of Madrasa Education. That was the context of this. This was the act in contention. Now, the Madrasa Act confers, this 2004 Act, confers the power on the Madrasa Board to prescribe courses for instruction, textbook and other books for instructional material and for the various different designations or sort of recognitions that it would provide. For undergrad students, they would be provided with the designation Alim, and Alim would be a known designation. Then Kamil for postgraduate students and Fazil, that is junior research program. So if you complete that madrasa education, depending upon till what level you have received that education, you would be provided with any of these designations required. Now, when did the situation erupt? So basically, you had a case where there was a petition filed by Muhammad Javed. Now, Muhammad Javed was appointed as a part-time assistant teacher in 2011 in the primary section of Madrasa Nisarul Uloom Shahzadpur in Akbarpur region on a fixed salary of Rs 4,000 per month with an 8% appraisal or 8% annual increment. That was the pay package. Now, he approached the High Court arguing that he should receive a salary equivalent to the regular teachers. And he also asked the High Court that the appointments to the madrasa should be regulated by the state government, the Madrasa Siksha Parishad and the district minority welfare officer. So that was Muhammad Javed's contention. Now the matter reached the Allahabad High Court on the aspect that this particular act violates the right to equality, that is under Article 14, and also under Article 21, where you have the right to education. So what is it violative of? It fails to provide quality compulsory education up to the age of 14 years or class 8, and that is mandatorily required under Article 21A of the Constitution. So it is seen to be violative of that. And also it was challenged that the kind of education that it provides, it goes against the fabric of secularism, so is violative or equality and is violative of Article 14 as well. So that was the kind of argument here. Now, Allahabad High Court issued a kind of a order where it quashed this Madrasa Act of 2004. So, if you take a look at the observations by the Allahabad High Court, what was the observation? That the state has no power to create a board for religious education or establish board for school education only for a particular religion and philosophy associated with it. The court said that, look, when it comes to about higher education, for higher education, it comes under entry 66, whereby of the concurrent list, where that is under the purview of the union government and not the state government. Higher education in terms of post-graduation study, graduation studies, etc. So the state government cannot form a legislation for that purpose. And also, the state, any such action on part of the state violates the principle of secularism, which is in letter and spirit of the Constitution of India. The same also violates Article 14 of the Constitution, which provides for equal treatment to every person by the state. This was the observation by the Allahabad High Court. Okay? Now, this was basically challenged in the Supreme Court. And Supreme Court heard the statement. First of all, it put it at, or it stayed this ruling by the Allahabad High Court. And then it came out with a decision, with an observation. The three-judge bench came out with the decision that, look, when you talk about terms like secularism, and Allahabad High Court had said that, look, this hampers the basic structure of the Constitution as well. Now, the Supreme Court said that when you use the term secularism, the aspect of equality, etc., for the various citizenry, now that is something, democracy, federalism, secularism, these are undefined concepts in the Constitution. It is about our understanding of what is the principle of secularism, what is that democracy, what is that ideal of federalism, right? It is not something which is bounded by a particular definition itself. So the Supreme Court said that simply quashing a legislation on this criteria, that is never warranted for. You cannot quash a legislation on this criteria. Okay. Now, it underscored that the 2004 Act ought to be construed with Article 21A to ensure that the religious minority institutions impart secular education of a requisite standard without destroying the minority character. Right? So that is where the Supreme Court basically held its stance. But the Supreme Court also said the legislative scheme for the Act is to standardize the level of education being prescribed in the madrasas. The Madrasa Act does not interfere with the day-to-day working of the madrasas. It is to protect the rights of minority in the state of Uttar Pradesh and is consistent with the positive obligation. This is the terminology you have to understand. The positive obligation of the state which ensures the students to pass out and earn a decent living. But then, this is where the Supreme Court said that let the administration function in terms of the madrasa education. You have to ensure there's a quality education. But then the Supreme Court also issued some caveats. And the caveats issued were basically that all this various different types of designations that are being provided like Fazil, etc., Kamil. Now, this is something which the madrasas cannot grant. This goes against the UGC Act. So that is something which should be scrapped off. Secondly, as per the provisions under Article 28, if let's suppose an individual who is gaining or garnering education and instruction in any of the publicly aided institutions, that is publicly funded institution, that is the government supported institutions, government funds are going there, they cannot they cannot be compelled to receive religious instruction or religious education. Okay, so under Article 28(3), a student attending minority institution recognized by the state or receiving aid from the state, there cannot be or should not be compelled to take part in religious instruction or forced to attend religious worship. So that is where it is upon the students also to decide where they go And at the same time, the onus is upon the board to provide with the quality education and disbarring those particular degrees that were being awarded, because it contravenes only UGC as per the Supreme Court. UGC has got that power to provide those degrees. Madrasas don't have that. Okay. Now, what will be the impact of future course of action? You see, now state like Uttar Pradesh, one of the most populous states of the country. Now, in Uttar Pradesh, you have large number of students who actually receive information and education from the madrasas. Now, the shutting down of the madrasas would have meant that their future would have been in abeyance. So, that is what the Supreme Court also said, that look, you cannot throw the baby along with the water if there is a problem, right? So that is why you need to regulate, you need to ensure that there is a quality education, quality information which is provided. That is something that you can monitor. Now, how to monitor that? That is going to be a major challenge, because you need the candidates, you need the students to be aware of the modern sciences, right? Modern education, and that scientific temper also needs to be inculcated amongst them. But at the same time, this ensures that the religious minority institutions have got the autonomy in terms of the functioning, as long as they adhere to the standards of modern education. Okay? Now, then coming to some of the articles in short, which is for the prelims. So, unmanned vessel finishes 1500-kilometer voyage from Mumbai to Tuticorin, that is Tuticorin. Now, that is something that we have covered even in our video for places in news, right? Where Tuticorin is and that voyage of 1500 kilometer. Now, this was also what was termed as the Sagar Mala Parikrama. Now, unmanned vessels are going to be very important in the naval warfare in the coming years, in the coming days. Why? Because when it comes to submarine warfare, when it comes to deterrence against the enemies, and even exploratory patrolling and reconnaissance, the Chinese Navy has been increasingly becoming aggressive in terms of the region of Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. So that is being seen as one of the checks. And when it comes to submarine forces also, China is already developing the unmanned submarine program, and that can be very detrimental for Indian interests. So that is where these unmanned vessels, that is, and the development of it, that is going to be very vital. Okay. Bhanu, that was the ideal, or the Bhanu, I hope your query is now solved, because that was the observation made by the Allahabad High Court in terms of the approach which was taken by the Allahabad High Court was that everybody is not receiving the same set of information, right? So that is why there is no equality. So that was seen to be violative, right? And one question by IME. US developed country and had adopted so many technology in other sector, but still didn't adopt any technology in election process. Why? So there are various aspects associated to it. The aspect of why US does not go for a modern machinery, because you have to understand that US is a much more formalized sector, formalized economy, formalized society. So their tracking of these can be very easily done, right? Electoral participation is abysmally low in US. So as you can see, the kind of electoral counting process had started, and it has been going on, even now it is continuing. Now, US is not well known and is not known for electoral frauds. For example, in countries like India, I don't know if any of you would be aware of that. Prior to the voting machines, you had an entire era where ballot box capturing, then deterioration or destruction of the ballot papers, that was a norm. So that is something which does not happen in US. There is a much better monitoring and tracking system, which makes the voting system more resilient. Okay? Now, PM Vidyalakshmi scheme for higher education gets nod. So the Union Cabinet provided the nod for the PM Vidyalakshmi scheme, which is set to provide benefit to almost 22 lakh students out there. How? So basically, this Vidyalakshmi scheme seeks to provide financial assistance to students for higher education. So loans up to around 7.5 lakhs, there you can get credit guarantee of 75% without any collateral, and that is going to help students significantly pursue higher studies. The banks will now be able to provide loans, provided that you have a coverage of almost 860 quality higher educational institutions, right? So be it public or private, if that institution is amongst that 860, it will be included and the students will be eligible, right? Enabling banks to extend the loans. Outlay of 3,600 crores have been made during 24-25 to 2030-31. Okay? Now, Union Cabinet infuses equity of 10,700 crores in Food Corporation of India. Now, this is seen to be a very important measure because when it comes to Food Corporation of India, FCI, it is one of the nodal organizations in terms of arranging the storage spaces for commodities to ensure that the post-harvest losses are not there for procurement of commodities, agricultural commodities. Now, Food Corporation of India has been incurring a lot of financial losses over the decades. So, financial crunch is something which is always associated with Food Corporation. As a result, it is unable to invest in newer technologies for procurement, smoothing procurement process, newer storage structures and safes are not being constructed. So as a consequence, the entire agricultural produce is facing a lot of damages. So that is why this kind of a capital infusion is a much welcome step. And this can bring about a continuity of this, can bring about some semblance of order in terms of agricultural procurement and agricultural prices. Okay. Now, India's palm oil imports have soared in the month of October by a whopping 59%. Now, which are the prime exporters of palm oil to India? You have the countries of Malaysia and Indonesia. These are the prime exporters of palm oil, and India is amongst the largest importers of edible oil across the world. Now, India, why it has experienced a sudden surge, it is accounted or it is attributed to the fact that you had both the cases of or the twin festivals of the Navratri season as well as Diwali, which came upon the month of October, and the previous muted demand since June, July, August. Now, all of that meant that there had been a pent-up demand for palm oil. Now, palm oil is used not only in edible products, but also in vast range of consumer items, be it cosmetics, creams, etc. So, increased consumer spending on palm oil, that means the commodity prices in the near time are going to go further higher up, but it also means that there is that consumer demand in the economy, which is a good news. Now, the reasons are something important to know. The aspect where it imports from, that is important to know. Utility of palm oil is important to know. Numbers, not important to remember. So that brings us to the final article. Automobile retail sales saw 32% growth in October. Now, be it the passenger vehicles, be it the commercial vehicles, two-wheelers, etc., they have indicated an increase in sales in the month of October. That generally happens during the festive season. Overall, across the automobile sector, the month of Navratri and Deepavali, together they account for almost 1/3 of the overall sales. Now, given the fact that all the various different retailers, wholesalers, etc., the dealerships, they have had a large stock of vehicles which had been building up for a long period of time. This is a welcome news. But what is more important for us to understand, that there is an increased demand for two-wheelers. Now, whenever there is an increased demand and growth of two-wheeler sales, that is indicative of a pickup of the rural demand. That means the rural demand has gone up. Now, why has the rural demand gone up? Now, this is basically attributable to two factors. One is better monsoons and better rains, which means better crop productivity. And secondly, increased MSP for Rabi crop. So these two are seen to be one of the primary driving factors of increase in the rural demand. Now, when there is increase in rural demand, always there will be a cascading effect in terms of the urban production, job creation, and even in the case of urban demand. Another good factor has been the rise in the sale of commercial vehicles. Commercial vehicles. Right. Now, these commercial vehicles are used for what? For transporting of materials, isn't it? So, that transportation of materials is something which means that the economic activities are going on. So, that is what you can derive out of it. Then, when we talk about the challenges or some points of concerns, the point of concern is, there are some points of concern, significant point of concern. The point of concern is that the commercial vehicle has not picked up to that extent. It has not picked up in double digits, which was the case when Indian economy was really thriving. And that is indicator of the fact that there is an inherent slowdown in sectors such as construction. Construction sector, when it grows, that is when the commercial vehicle sales, etc., go through the roof. So that is also something which is lacking. So these are some of the challenges, and it might also be the case that all the rise in the passenger vehicles and all the rise in the commercial vehicles is done away with. So that is why the manufacturers, they are actually reducing the amount of production to ensure that the dealerships, they are able to recirculate or rather sell the existing stockpiles that they have. Otherwise, there is a problem of storage and deterioration of the product, which many of the wholesale producers or the wholesalers experience, right? So that is basically the crux that you can extract out of it. Is not two-wheeler sale indicate middle class demand too? Absolutely yes. But middle class is more prominently present where? When you have 65% of our population, as per the census, previous census, 65% of the population is living in the rural countryside, rural India. So that is where always the demand of the two-wheelers is seen to be one of the requirements or indicators. The years when India has experienced agricultural crisis, years when India has experienced crop losses, two-wheeler demand has sharply fallen down. So a rise and uptick of two-wheeler has always traditionally, for almost now 2 decades, that has been the norm, that the economists always take a look at the two-wheeler segment, that whether the two-wheeler segment is going up or it is stagnating. That gives you an idea about the rural economy always. Okay? Right. So that is where now why it has not adopted EVM and VVPAT, US has not adopted, I have already answered that. Kindly take a look at it again. That is owing to the fact that it is much organized societal system. The electoral frauds are not something which is there in US, and they have a very low electoral participation, right? So that is why they can still go ahead with the traditional mechanism, but still that creates a lot of discrepancies in US electoral counting as well. So that is why they have not gone for it, or they are hesitant to use the system. Okay, it is not a part of a larger conspiracy per se. Anyways, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. I advise you to do visit our Telegram channel and take a look at the quiz and attempt the multiple choice question which can be framed from the topic. If you have liked the session, please click on the like, share and the subscribe button. We meet again tomorrow. Take care. Goodbye. Thank you.